How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to Blade Bias. This video is going to serve purely as an excuse to talk about my new camera. Hopefully I'm in focus here, because one of the main issues or things with this camera is that there is no continuous autofocus, which might be a big, we'll get to that in a minute. We got to talk about the basics first. So my new camera is a Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K. Which is very nice, and the lens that is along with it is the camaroEE 35mm 1.33 times anamorphic. Junior is looking out the window, so let's talk about that. The Blackmagic Pocket 4K. For some people, if you're not super involved in the cinema camera world, Blackmagic might be a name you've never even heard of. Blackmagic is the company that makes DaVinci Resolve, the editing software, which I think is one of the best, if not the single best editing software out there. And they also make a lot of, Blackmagic started as a broadcasting gear company, but now they're also in the cinema world. And Blackmagic makes a line of cameras called the Pocket Cinema Camera. Now, when most people think of cameras, going back to that, they think of Canon, Sony. If you're really in the know, you might think of Fujifilm, Nikon, some of the slightly more niche companies. Most of the time people think of Canon and Sony when you think of camera. So Blackmagic is a name that doesn't do what those other companies do. Blackmagic cameras are cinema cameras, and that's it. Blackmagic does not make a consumer hybrid photo video camera. They're all cinema cameras, which is why a lot of people have not heard or ever seen Blackmagic cameras before, because they're not consumer cameras. They're not just casual shooting, hey, I'm going to go out and take a few photos of my buddy's cameras. They are not that at all. They are cinema cameras. So what is the difference between a cinema camera and a consumer photo video camera, like any of the Canon mirrorless cameras, the Canon 80D, the Canon whatever the heck, the Sony cameras, the A6000, the A7S3, A7S4 now, is that all of those cameras, they divide it up differently, but they are some portions focused on photo, some portions focused on video. So a lot of those cameras have amazing photo features, and they take absolutely astounding photos. And then video, they also take really good video. But that's it. They just take really good video. Some cameras take really, really good video, especially notably the A7 III and the A7 IV, as well as the FX30 from Sony. And now we're getting into a little bit more of the cinema kind of end of things. But most cameras that people buy are photo cameras that happen to take pretty good video. That's the majority of the market. Now, in that, there are some compromises. When you build a camera from the ground up to do both, you naturally fall into a situation of compromise, where there are some compromises. Some of the most basic ones are just the button layout is something that is mostly geared towards photography on basically every consumer camera. The software and the overall internals of the camera are mostly geared towards photo, with the ability to capture really good video. And if a new feature is added in most of those cameras, the priority is going to be on photography, because that is the majority of users. Now, cinema cameras, on the other hand, say, yeah, we don't care about pictures. We don't care about taking photos. Let's design the whole thing from the ground up to be for video. And when you cut out the portion of a camera that is designed to take photos, you make some room for more video features. Now, some cinema cameras are kind of the middle ground, like the FX30, which is one of Sony's newer middle ground. It is a cinema camera. However, it also does have photo modes and photo features. Same thing with the Canon R5C, I think it's called. which is a cinema camera, but it does still have photo features. And those are cameras that are pretty pricey. The FX30 is more affordable, but especially the Canon, the R5C, and I think it's the R5C. I could be wrong on that. But the FX3, especially from Sony, those are things that are very, very expensive. And where Blackmagic comes in is that Blackmagic took it very personal and said, we just hate photos and we don't care. So everything on this camera, from to keep it simple, the stuff that's easy to understand, the button layout, the actual menus of the camera, the resolutions and frame rates, everything is designed to be used for video. And that's the simple version of it, is button layouts, the look of the video, the look that gets put out of the camera is more focused on video, and just some internal things that make it video. So that's kind of the easy way to explain it. There is really no easy way to tell you the differences, because a lot of the differences, the only people who are going to care about them and understand the reason why you'd want something like that is cinematographers and people who want cinema cameras. So for a lot of people, cinema cameras sound kind of pointless. Why would you want this little bit of extra performance? Well, really, it is a noticeable improvement in performance. Why would you want this kind of I don't know. Why would you want this improvement of performance over losing some basic camera features like continuous autofocus, and generally them being very expensive, and you need to kind of build them out into a rig, spend even more money on top of the camera itself, because a lot of the times they don't even come, like, you can't handhold them and carry them around with you. You need to build them into a giant rig with an external monitor, external storage system, all this extra stuff. So for a lot of people, you know, they just don't see the point. But if you don't see the point in a cinema camera, then cinema cameras are not for you. It is literally that simple. If those compromises sound like not a good thing for you, then cinema cameras aren't for you. Period. End of story. You don't have to justify buying a cinema camera because you want, like, if cinema cameras aren't for you, you'll know they're not for you. However, somebody like me who exclusively shoots videos, I've had my Canon M50, it's sitting over there on my desk. I've had that thing for 2 years now, and I've taken a grand total of maybe 10 pictures on it. The rest has been exclusively video. So there are some things that I don't need. And the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera is one of the, I think it is the single most affordable cinema camera on the market. And to get into more of the technical side of things. Now, the reason I went with Blackmagic over something like the FX30, which is kind of cinema camera, but with a little bit of hybrid camera in there, can still do good photography, but is still built to be a cinema camera. The reason I went with the Blackmagic is, one, price. The Pocket Cinema Camera 4K is $1,300, and the FX30 is $1,800. And I also had to get a lens in there, so I could afford the Blackmagic and a lens. I could not afford the FX30 and a lens, and I don't have Sony lenses, so I would be sitting with a camera with no lens for a while, and that's no good. So part of it was out of necessity. Another part of it was that I work in DaVinci Resolve, and like I mentioned before, Blackmagic is the company that makes DaVinci Resolve and these cameras. So cinema cameras shoot in this wonderful thing called RAW formats. If any of you are photographers and you know RAW from the photography world, it is similar, but in video it's a little bit different because video RAW is a lot more complex than photography RAW because of the amount of information stored. Basically, you know, you take a photo in RAW, you take one photo, it has time to process, you get all that information, and you're good. In video, you have to do that at least 24 times a second, if not 30 or 60 times a second. So getting good RAW on a camera is very difficult to do and usually only comes in very expensive cameras. Now, luckily, the Blackmagic as a company, sorry, made their own RAW format called BRAW or Blackmagic RAW, but it is called, in files, it's called BRAW. And BRAW is only on Blackmagic cameras, and BRAW natively imports into DaVinci Resolve. And it is one of the, if you are using Blackmagic RAW with DaVinci Resolve, it is one of the easiest video editing experiences I've ever had. Because the thing with RAW formats is that, if you have no idea what a RAW format is, when you take a video normally, you take a video on your iPhone, right? All that color information is there. It's baked into the file, right? The white balance, the exposure, everything is baked in. And in order to change that, you are messing with the final image. You are taking the frames that are rendered out already and you're tampering them, which doesn't give you a lot of flexibility because, see, if you have something that is pure white and you try to bring that down, it's not going to re-expose and bring your information back. It's just going to bring that pure white down to a light gray. It's still going to be blown out. There's nothing you can do to get that information back if it's already baked into the file. When you record in RAW, you are getting the straight up sensor data that is recorded onto your camera, and your computer is doing the work to decode that. And the benefit of that is that, hey, my shot is overexposed. Let me just turn the sensitivity down so that when it's decoding this information, it just doesn't decode it as harshly. And you can recover a lot of the things that are blown out. You can turn your ISO down, turn the actual sensor sensitivity down to the point where that information is recovered. It's not blown out anymore because you are basically just lowering the sensitivity of your camera. So that's what ISO does. It's your sensor sensitivity. But basically, you are just lowering how much light the sensor is producing, or taking in, sorry. It is very, very complicated, and I don't fully understand technically how that works. But you can take shots that are horribly overexposed and bring them down to a point where they are perfectly exposed and you didn't lose any information. Same thing with color information. You can take shots that are horribly in the wrong, like, white balance, and you can recover them. And that is one of the magics of working in RAW, because yes, you do still have to worry about exposure and all that, but I have had so many shots that are, oh no, this is overexposed. My highlights are clipping in the background. Turn the ISO down, and it just fixes it. It just brings back that information, and it changes the information before it kicks out a final image. When you're working in just MP4 files, you are adjusting the final image. So if it's already pinned at pure white, like I said, you're just bringing that pure white down to a light gray. You're not bringing that information back. With RAW, you are adjusting the brightness before you kick out a final image. So if something's overblown and something is clipping, you can bring that down before it kicks out the final image and bring it down to a point where it's not clipping anymore. It is very hard to understand, and I don't fully understand it. If you see working in RAW in action, or you ever work with RAW video, it is a miracle. The things you can do with RAW video, it is genuinely, like, mind-boggling how useful RAW video is, and just how much cool stuff is going on behind the scenes. But that is one of the main reasons I went with Blackmagic, is because I edit in DaVinci Resolve. I have tried Premiere and After Effects. I gave them a good couple months of trying it out, and I fully enjoy DaVinci Resolve more. I am just much happier with my performance in DaVinci Resolve. I am much happier with the tools that Resolve offers. So it's not like I'm gonna move on from Resolve. I am deep in using DaVinci Resolve. I have tried After Effects. I've tried the whole Adobe suite, and I prefer Resolve, so I'm going to stay there. So the native performance of using BRAW in DaVinci Resolve is one of the main reasons I went with Blackmagic. And one thing that you got to understand about RAW files is that they are absolutely massive, and incredibly difficult to play back, especially in 4K. Dear God, like playing back some of the other RAW formats that are not native is a nightmare. And a lot of times, like if this was like Red RAW or ARRI RAW, I think ARRI has, I don't know what ARRI RAW is called, but especially Red RAW, which comes from the Red cinema cameras, my computer would not be able to handle that. It straight up would not be able to, because that is so much information that it's ridiculous. Some of those formats are taking 10 to 15 gigabytes per minute of information, and that's ridiculous. Luckily, Blackmagic RAW introduced the 12:1 compression, which is what this is filmed on, which is about a gigabyte per minute per footage, or of footage, sorry, about a gigabyte per minute. And that is the lowest storage consumption that you can do on this camera. That is the least. It only goes up from there. If you turn off the compression and go with like the lowest compression algorithm for BRAW, it is like 20 gigabytes a minute. It's insane. But imagine trying to play back that big of a file 4K in your editing software. Most editing softwares can't even handle most people's computers can't even handle 4K in just regular like iPhone footage. I can only imagine trying to edit 4K RAW on like a MacBook or something. It would be brutal. So that's where Blackmagic does its magic and does their thing, and natively supports BRAW so well in Resolve that I can preview 4K DCI, mind you, which is 4K, but it's even more resolution. It's normal 4K. The frame width is 3840. 4K DCI is like 4020 something. It's just a little bit wider, just because the sensor is a slightly different size, or something like that. I don't know, but it's a little bit extra resolution on top of 4K, which is good because you can punch in a little bit, just a little bit extra resolution. And that, I don't even know where I was going with that, but these are massive, massive, massive files that people have trouble with editing just regular like iPhone footage in that kind of resolution, especially at like 30 or 60 FPS. So BRAW being so easy to edit, my computer can play back and edit that footage without dropping a single frame. And I don't have an insane computer. It's just that's how well BRAW works with DaVinci Resolve, which is absolutely astonishing. I know to a lot of people this is making absolutely zero sense, and I'm not the best at explaining all this because, to be honest, I am not a professional. I have just started working with RAW and understanding RAW pretty recently because I just got this camera a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago. So I'm not the best myself. But this is something that I think was a needed upgrade for me, because going from the M50, which is 1080p, you can do 4K, but it's horrendously cropped and it's not good to film with because of the crop, and just it's kind of laggy, and 4K does not output on the M50 to monitors properly. At least my monitor, it stutters really, really bad, which is only on the M50, by the way. I'm displaying 4K on this monitor right now from the Blackmagic, and it's doing it just fine. There's just an M50 thing. But I'm going from that, which is a 1080p signal in a very compressed MP4 format, which has no real depth and no real, like, I can't recover that footage very, very well, to this, a full 4K DCI RAW format, which is insane. And the dynamic range of the Pocket 4K is very, very good. And with RAW, you do get even more dynamic range, because you have a lot more flexibility. You can push and pull a lot harder before things start to clip. So I'm like losing my train of thought because I've been talking so much. There are a lot of reasons that I wanted to get a camera upgrade. But overall, the main reason is just the flexibility and the ease of use and the ability to be like, hey, this shot was slightly overexposed. Instead of having to push it and potentially lose my colors and mess the exposure up, and now the contrast is all messed up, I can just go into the RAW file, change the ISO a little bit, change the white balance a little bit, and it's good. It's fixed, and there's no artifacting. There's no crazy, like, destroyed of my colors. Like, it just works. It just works. And that's the most beautiful thing. It just works. In terms of losing some of the main features that a lot of people are super hyped on, like continuous autofocus, from a cinematography standpoint, autofocus can be kind of annoying because it is something that can fail. And that's the thing with cinema cameras and cinematography. They try to eliminate as many failure points as possible. 90% of the time, cinematographers are sitting behind the camera. So that is the point. This is not a vlogging camera. It is not supposed to, I mean, this is already pushing it. Me filming myself is already like pushing past what it's meant to be used for. When you get in front of the camera, you know, it starts to get annoying that you don't have continuous autofocus. And that's really the main thing that people complain about. But behind the camera, that is something that doesn't matter because this lens, the anamorphic lens that I'm shooting on, does not have autofocus in the first place. So it doesn't matter if my camera had autofocus because I wouldn't have been able to use it. And to briefly touch on what anamorphic lenses are, you see how this video is widescreen? This is not cropped in any way. This is anamorphic lenses shoot in a stretched format, like the video looks really tall and squished together because it's recording extra information on the sides that it squishes in, your camera records, and then in your editing software, you de-squeeze it so that you get extra information on the sides. So it's not like I'm just putting, what I used to do on my M50 is I would just put black bars on the top and bottom here. But the problem with that is that you are just straight up chucking away information. You're just cutting off parts of your image. But instead of putting black bars on the top and bottom, you are, with an anamorphic lens, just adding information on the sides. So it is truly ultra wide aspect ratios, which is good. And yeah, I think I should probably shut up now because this video is 22 minutes long. And this is going to be a huge file. And I don't want my camera to die. That's another thing with the Pocket 4K that is horse doo-doo, is the battery life. That one I'm not even gonna like make an excuse for. It's just really bad. It is just really bad on the Pocket 4K. Battery life is not good. But yeah, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments. In terms of this stuff, you guys always leave ballast on questions in the comments. But if you have any questions about cinema cameras or why I bought the things I bought or anything that you need further clarification on, because I'm not always the best at talking and thinking as I'm talking, leave a comment. I go through and read the comments, especially if you have a comment or a question about the actual cinematography and camera stuff. Let me know. Leave a comment. I'll do my best to answer it. That's about it. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you all again very, very soon. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.